So we're going to look at the brainstem and the nerves, but the nerves coming out of the spine and the different qualities of the different areas of the nerves. We're going to be looking at the nerves, and then also the flows of fluid through the actual brain itself. We've looked at the flow of fluid moving into the ventricles and down and out through the nerves. We looked at a certain amount the flow of cranial fluid coming out of the whole central nervous system and around the central nervous system down and out through the nerves. We're going to go into that in a bit more depth this time. But we're going to look at the channels of fluid moving within the brain and the makeup of the brain and the channels within the brain. So I'm not sure how long that's going to take because I haven't taught that before. So we're just going to have to see how that goes. Then we'll do a meditation with that. And if we got time, then we'll move into going through the face, but in a different way to how we did it last time. So does that sound
good?
Yeah, we've got a few goods there.
Yeah. I like the idea of going into the face again if we can do it.
Oh, we're going to work with the face a lot. We've worked with the nerve connection to the face. We'll be working with that more and how that it basically is connecting to the brain stem, but also how that spreads out through the whole brain. Also, how the different energies of the different parts of the face relate to the different parts of the brain and the different cells and energies within the brain, how the bone structure of the face relates to the bone structure of the cranium, because there's all sorts of ways that the face relates to the cranium and relates to the brain and then relates down and mirrors through the whole body as a holographic relationship over and over. And obviously because this breathing is stemming from the face in a way, because we start with the movement of the jaw, so it activates a physical motion in the face and then a physical motion in the cranium, then a physical motion through the whole body and every cell. So that movement is actually in the face, but how the face relates to the brain, and for me, in a way, how you can detoxify the whole brain, and how the brain can come to life from this, and a new awareness can come to the anatomy of the brain. And then how that spreads through our body, because we have that awareness of our body. You know, people know how to view their bodies, and we have that awareness of our emotions. People know how to view their emotions, but it's different with the brain. People don't generally have an awareness of their own brain, the different areas of their brain, the different qualities of their brain. And for me, a lot of that is that people, when you're looking at the anatomy and feeling the qualities and of the anatomy of the brain, in a lot of ways you're viewing the intellect. That's where the intellect is housed, in a way, is in the cells of the brain. And I think that is a hard thing to be separate from. Most people are very identified with that. So the intellect, we're quite enamored with the intellect. So I kind of got the feeling that's why the normal anatomy is so doesn't make sense for the cranial fluid. It's ridiculous that people can look at it and not see what's there, because to look at the anatomy, you're viewing your own anatomy, and to view the anatomy of the central nervous system and brain. You're viewing the anatomy in a way of the intellect and the higher centres, and it's, for some reason, it's blanked off to people. And my feeling is that is why the normal anatomy or the picture of how the cranial fluid is kind of ridiculous. It's truly ridiculous. So that is what we're embarking on, in a way that we can work with that, and we have access to that from the face as a way of cleansing the brain, as a way of it coming to life, as a way of it detoxifying. My experience, because to start off with, it was my way of getting better from Lyme's disease. I had an incurable disease that I could barely get out of bed with, and I continually had pneumonia and chest infections, and I just knew my body couldn't fight it on its own. For some reason, with that illness, my immune system was losing, and so I used it to in a way cleanse my brain, because the Lyme's disease attacks the brain. And I was thinking about that the other day, because the way I described when we were talking of the anatomy, that when I first started doing holographic breathing, I felt this release from my brain, and I could feel the cranial fluid flowing down and out through the nerves, in a way that I had not imagined before. And actually, in the first instant, that wasn't true. What I felt initially was the toxins releasing. I didn't see a bright light and bright cranial fluid releasing off down. I felt all the neurotoxins from the Lyme's disease releasing, in a way that I didn't think was possible, because I had this picture of the central nervous system and the brain, one of the blood-brain barrier, and people saying to me things like, oh, the brain cannot detoxify because of the blood-brain barrier. And secondly, from the anatomy that I had learned, which is the normal anatomy of how the cranial fluid works from 2 cranial trainings. But as it released, first it was a very dark energy and very toxic coming out of the brain, and just releasing with the cranial fluid out into the body and then into the lymph and away. And I was surprised at how quickly it was doing that. It was like, woof. It was an energy releasing, but I could feel the toxins going. And the Lyme's disease was getting better quite quickly from really being... Lyme's disease, people who have it quite often describe it as they feel like they're dying. And for me, that is what it felt like. It's not just you feel chronically fatigued and can hardly do anything. You feel like it's killing you. And so it changed from that. And I think a lot of that feeling, the fatigue and this feeling, was coming from the build-up of toxins in my brain and central nervous system. And as they released, suddenly I was able to move around more. I wasn't so tired. I wasn't so ill. And then that carried on. And then after a while, it does just become a bright energy coming out and travelling down and out with the cranial fluid. But an interesting thing for me in those early days, because I was just focusing on the brain, because that's where the disease starts. That's what it attacks. It attacks the neural tissue. It brings down the microglial cells, which are the immune system for the brain. It breaks the myelinated glial cells, which are like the myelin sheath, and you start shaking a lot, a bit like Parkinson's disease or MS. So that's kind of where it starts, and when the immune system for the brain goes, then that somehow brings down the immune system for the whole body. So you cannot fight off common colds, flus. They become a chest infection, then the chest infection becomes pneumonia because you don't have the immune system to deal with it. And as these toxins started leaving and as my brain became more aware, then my health started to improve. But what was also interesting, as my brain, or as I became more aware of my brain, I started feeling younger. As it cleared, suddenly I feel like I'm 20 or I'm a teenager or something. I didn't look like it, but inside I could feel myself much younger. And I think there's the possibility of that. As the brain detoxifies, as we become aware of it, as we become disenamored with the intellect, I think there's the possibility of not aging so quickly. I think aging starts in the brain and central nervous system and spreads through the whole body. And because it is, people are generally unaware of it and generally just part of the intellect or part of the ego or part of that mechanism, whatever it is, rather than being separate from it and viewing it, then it's not a particularly easy thing to work with. But with the anatomy as I'm describing it, it gives something to view. So you don't say, oh, I'm going to view the intellect. You view the cells that are there that hold the energies of the intellect. Because quite often people say, oh, I'm going to watch my thoughts. But for me that is different than from viewing the intellect. There's a quality to it. If you try and view your thoughts, they just go, they're not there anymore. So it's not so easy to view your thoughts. But you can be aware of the qualities of the intellect, and you can feel the patterns of the intellect falling apart or just going, what is normally running you. You can feel them going around, still carrying on, but you are no longer captive to them. And in a way that breaks up everything. That disconnects you from the I don't know what the words are, the wheel of Dharma, or your past history, or the karma from past lives, in a way that takes you out of that cycle that just keeps on running. Is those matrices which are kind of in our brain as in a physical form. It is present in a physical form. So it's not a small thing we're doing. And like when we work with the brainstem, people felt a lot of people just felt ill straight afterwards, just because of the toxins leaving so quickly. So we're going to go a bit more into the anatomy of that now, and we haven't done it yet, but we're going to look at the makeup of the brain as well. We're going to be first of all looking at the nerves and the different makeup of the nerves. If we get time, we'll go in and look up the makeup of the brain as well, and the flows of cranial fluid within that, or how I see it anyway. Okay, good. And we looked at these pictures, how the cranial nerves are connected to the fourth ventricle. And from that, I was wondering, well, where does the optic nerve connect to the cranial fluid for its supply of cranial fluid? Because it's not on these. And my image of the optic nerve is that it comes from the brain, it comes from the back of the head, where you've got nerve tracts, and comes around to the side of the thalamus. Then it comes around just in front of the pituitary gland and connects together, and they either crosses over or goes out and then goes to the eyes. So for my image of it was that it connects to the outside of the thalamus and then crosses in front of the thalamus. And I wanted to check, if there was places that it connected to the cranial fluid. And one of the places here in the third ventricle, I always wondered what this beak was, because the cranial fluid is heavier than the rest of the fluid in the body, so it will go down into there and settle in that area a bit like a well. What I hadn't realised was that the actual bird's beak is around the optic nerve, where it crosses, where the optic nerve crosses is in that beak. The beak is holding the optic nerve, and there's a well of fluid there. So for me, that is a major place where the cranial fluid would flow into the optic nerve. And also from these pictures you can see you've got the nuclei for in the hypothalamus area, and a lot of these feed the pituitary gland, and they've got nerve tracts that also the cranial fluid can flow down into the pituitary gland. So but then after that I started looking into it further, because I thought, well, where the optic nerve is joining to the side of the thalamus, maybe that is close to the lateral ventricle, so it may also be taking cranial fluid from the lateral ventricles. And actually the picture's here, and the optic nerve is actually here. You've got these two things. I can't remember their names. I can never remember names of anything. The medial geniculated body, something like that. But it's two bits where the optic nerve comes out, and it's actually in the fourth ventricle. So the optic nerve connects to the cranial fluid in the fourth ventricles, either the lateral ventricles either side. And then later I realised or saw on this picture, there is that body joining to the optic nerve on the side. I hadn't seen this, and there's a relay and there's a nucleus that comes into the top of the fourth ventricle and the bottom of the third ventricle. So from not knowing where the optic nerve connects to the cranial fluid, it's connecting in the fourth ventricle, it's connecting in the third ventricle towards the back, it's connecting at the front of the third ventricle in the beak, and it's connecting into the lateral ventricles on either side. And as the just got to find a picture, I'm not sure where the picture is. And where the lateral ventricle travels back here, the actual nerve tracts skirt along the back of the lateral ventricle, so it very much falls into the area where I was saying the ventricles, one of the reasons for the ventricles is to provide oxygen and glucose for the cranial nerve. that is where, and from thinking there wasn't anywhere that the optic nerve actually connected to, it actually connects to all of the ventricles. And so I'm just thinking how to go about this, because I want to bring lots of different things together in this. So where's my bottles? Let's just talk about the general fluid coming through the brain and through the ventricles, and then that gives it a basis and we can carry on from that. So you've got the blood supply coming to all of the capillaries through the whole brain and cranial and central nervous system, and then you've got the venous blood going back, and then you're left with this much cranial fluid that's got to find a way back other than through the venous blood. There's 10 times as much pressure in the arterial blood than in the venous blood, so the venous blood is going much more slowly, so it can't take all of the fluid, and it leaves this body of cranial fluid that's got to find another way back other than the venous blood. And this is going very slowly. The arterial blood is going quite quickly, the venous blood is going slowly or really quite slowly, the cranial fluid is going very slowly. The movement of the cranial fluid can't be measured where it's flowing. That's why they have problems saying, well, where does cranial fluid go? Because it can't be measured, the flow of it. So this is moving very slowly, and for me there's not really anywhere else for it to flow other than down through the nerves. And then this will be this. I think this is about how much cranial fluid is being produced by the ventricles. If that is being produced by the capillaries within the whole central nervous system, about that much is being produced from the ventricles, because just looking at the amount of arterial blood going to both of them, for me, looking at it, about 4 or 5 times as much blood supply to the rest of the central nervous system than the ventricles. So the top of the brain, the encephalon, this, or the cerebrum, this is about 85% of volume of the whole central nervous system. So this is producing the major amount of cranial fluid to go back, and there's no actual nerves coming out of the cerebrum to take the cranial fluid away. The optic nerve actually drops down below the tentorium. The only nerve there is the olfactory nerve, which is actually isn't strictly a nerve, it's part of the brain, and cranial fluid can go down that anyway, and then it becomes little nerves at the end and it can come down through there. So that is one way. What happens is it will come down 3 ways. It can either go into the ventricles, into the lateral ventricles, into the 3rd ventricle, and then down through the 4th ventricle, where it's picked up by the nerves or the nerve nuclei in the brain stem and carried out through there. It can come out into the optic nerve, which I'm not sure, some of it might be above the tentorium, but most of it is below and going out, so it can go into that. It can spread out of the brain, around the brain, just through, there's a space of cranial fluid all around the cerebrum, and then there's a hole where it drops down through the tentorium, which is this membrane between the upper and lower brain. It can drop down the outside through that hole. And the other way we're going to look at in a bit is how it goes through the interior of the brain, how it moves through the membranes within, how there are tracks within the cerebrum coming down into the brain stem, and how there are tracks in the cerebellum coming into the brain stem, and these become like rivers to take the cranial fluid down within the whole thing. So we're going to look at all of those. So we've got the cranial nerves here inside the brain stem, the nuclei, and they come out in here. And then this is I think the 7th or 8th. This is the 8th cranial nerve. It's coming into the ear. So I wonder where here it is on here. So here it is coming out from where it backs up against the fourth ventricle, and it comes out the side of the brain stem, and then from there it travels from the brain stem into the side of the cranium, and then from there it travels into the eardrums and the different parts of the interior of the ear. So for me, on that journey, it's not going to be the same thing all of the way. As it's travelling through the brain stem, it's surrounded by cranial fluid, and it's got cranial fluid inside it. So this is what we showed when it's travelling down the nerves coming out through the body, and inside the myelinated glial cells will be cranial fluid, and outside the cranial fluids will be fine fibres, soft tissue with a milky fluid in it, which isn't cranial fluid. But this is the same thing that's happening inside the brainstem, except inside the myelinated glial cells it will be cranial fluid, and also around the myelinated glial cells will also be cranial fluid. So it will have a different quality to it. So it's cranial fluid surrounded by cranial fluid. And what I'm not sure about when it travels down the nerves, the myelinated glial cells bud up together so that the fluid from around can't get onto the axon. But that is no longer necessary within the body of the brainstem, or within the body of the brainstem, because it's surrounded by cranial fluid. So the myelinated glial cells may still be separate at that stage, but there's no anatomy I can find to tell. So there's a different quality when you're feeling the flow of cranial fluid within the brain, in the nerves within the brain. It has a different quality to the nerves when it's coming out. And then when it comes out, and so it's going to be taking oxygen and glucose from the fourth ventricle to help on this journey, and then when it comes out, and it's in this area here, travelling from the brain stem to the side of the brain, there's also this area where it also needs glucose and oxygen. And what you have at the sides the lateral aperture or foramen of Lusker. At either side of the brainstem, halfway up the pons, you have the cranial fluid coming out of the fourth ventricle on both sides, and that will be round about here and here. And there's a breath which we're going to be working with later, of how the brain breathes, how the cranial fluid breathes, how the cranium breathes. So there's this movement to the brain. So as this oxygen and glucose in the cranial fluid come back, it gets dispersed all around that area, and what you have is all of these cranial nerves coming out, and then there's the supply of oxygen and glucose from the fourth ventricle. Then as they come out in this area, you've got the cranial fluid coming out the sides of the fourth ventricle, and then it can be fed by oxygen and glucose through that area where it normally wouldn't have any nutrition. So this is why I'm saying that the nerves are fed from the ventricles, not just in the inside, but where the fluid is coming out from the ventricles as well. It's joining to the nerves and going. And then as soon as it comes through the side of the brain here, or the side of the cranium here, to these parts of the ear, then definitely the myelinated glial cells pull together. They're no longer surrounded by cranial fluid. They've got the normal blood supply, which has got loose connections, so there's different toxins there, there'll be different viruses, bacteria. It's not such a refined system, so the myelinated glial cells butt up together and they connect, and the feeling of that for me is that it becomes like a train where they all couple together and that it pulls. It's got like a wicking motion, that it pulls the cranial fluid along it, in the same way as would happen like in a tree, like an oak tree on a good day will pull up something like 250 gallons of water right up to the top leaves. And for me, the myelinated glial cells have that action. It's a very similar thing. So they make these capillaries for the cranial fluid to travel along. So what we have is different qualities to the nerves as they come out. It's, you know, and we're looking at this thing again where the brain and the central nervous systems, in the names of it, is separate from the nerves. You've got the central nervous system, that is one thing because it's called the central nervous system. Then you've got the nerves, which are another thing because they're called nerves. But actually what we're going to look at is the whole transition of the different anatomy of the different nerves and the nerve tracks through the brain and how they merge with the brain as one whole system. So as from the nuclei as they come out, there's cranial fluid that I guess, I've got a feeling, it may be pulled together. If the myelinated glial cells are pulled together, then you've got a river of cranial fluid being drawn along the myelinated cells. And this is just open within the brain. This is just open passages between them. So these can work as rivers for the cranial fluid to travel along between the cranial fluid. So you have both. And then as it comes out through here, it is still that. It is still cranial fluid between them. Because if this flowed back up in here, the milky fluid from the nerves as they come through, then this would contaminate that whole area. So you get a flow of cranial fluid continually flowing through there to stop the environment of the body flowing back into the central nervous system and into the nerves. So this is so for all of the cranial nerves, for the optic nerves and all of the cranial nerves coming down. For me, they are fed by the cranial fluid. They're fed by the cranial fluid from the fourth ventricle, and the optic nerve is fed by the cranial fluid from all of the ventricles. They're fed inside from the cranial fluid there, and then they're fed outside from the cranial fluid coming out the side apertures of the fourth ventricle. This wraps around and it's about here. The side apertures is about there. Now, we're going to tie this together a bit. So the myelinated glial cells, sorry, the nerves, here we've got two neurons, and they're joined by an axon, and that, in this case, it's myelinated. It's got myelinated glial cells around. It's within the central nervous system because there's a gap between them. So a nerve is just this, a long one of those that can travel from the spinal cord and out through the nerves, the whole length of an arm, just one of these, the whole length of the arm or whole length of the leg. And then when this comes into the spinal cord or into the brain stem, what happens is these spread out and become tracks. So you have nerves, but they become nerve tracks. They're just not held together so tightly, and they have astrocyte cells, which is like connecting tissue for the whole brain. Sometimes they have astrocyte cells between them, so suddenly there's extra cells and there's microglial cells. So you have different cells. You have the astrocyte cells, you have, I can see why I was getting lost. There's just so many things that I wanted, and in a way it is dependent on people seeing the videos before. You have all these different cells there holding it together.
The astrocytes then not in the brain.
Yeah, they are.
Because I've looked after people with like cancer of the astrocyte cells.
Pardon?
Astrocytoma, I think it's called. It's a cancer of the astrocyte cells.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I'm just asking for that
Well,
one.
it sounds pretty rough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
They basically hold everything together. The brain would just be fluid unless the astrocyte cells were there. They're now seeing that they thought of them as fillers before, or just connective tissue. They now can see that they light up as the energies travel along through the neurons. The astrocyte cells light up at the same time, and they've got no idea how that's happening. They cannot see the energies, how they're doing it, but it travels through the fluids. So who can think of within the actual brain itself, a nerve within the brain itself?
Yeah.
It doesn't leave the brain.
Pardon?
Doesn't leave the brain. Are you
Doesn't
saying
leave the
one
brain, no. One within the brain that doesn't leave the brain.
You got me there.
So it connects the brain internally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. What's at the top of the brainstem?
It's the, one
Hypothalamus.
is the, I can't never remember the name, the corpus callosum.
Oh yeah, divides the brain.
See this huge area here
Yeah.
joining the two halves of the brain. That is made up of myelinated or myelinated glial cells around axons, and it joins the neurons on one side of the brain to the neurons on the other, and information just travels. So in a way, that is a thick nerve within the brain itself. So this is like a nerve within the brain. So in a way, we're starting to join the nerves to the brain. So you can see it's actually just made of the same stuff. And if you divide it, central nervous system to nerves, you lose the picture. You
Yeah,
know,
I didn't know that was a nerve.
yeah, that is a nerve.
Yeah.
So you've done cranial work, you've looked, for me there's three parts. You've got the cerebrum, you've got the brain stem, and you've got the cerebellum.
Mm-hmm.
What joins the cerebrum to the brain stem? Who knows what joins the cerebrum to the brain stem?
Pons? Is it the pons?
Pons.
That means bridge, doesn't it?
Well, the pons is part of the
Don't
brain
know.
stem.
Oh.
See,
No, no,
this is for knowing the cranial fluid. This is important things to know. Again, I can never remember the names. The cerebral peduncle. So here we have the brain stem with the thalamus on top, and here you've got the cerebral peduncle, and there'll be one either side going to both halves of the brain. And that, again, there may be some astrocyte cells in it, but that is another nerve. It's called nerve tracts. It's mainly axons, myelinated axons coming down, and they will fit together in this pattern. Whenever you get something round, they make this flower of life shape, and between them there is spaces with cranial fluid. So for me, these become tracks for cranial fluid to travel down, and this is one of the ways through here. All of these become like a river for the cranial fluid from the two halves of the cerebrum to come down into the brainstem. So starting to give a picture of what the cells are in the brain and the brainstem, and how they're the same as the nerves in a lot of ways. How does the cerebellum join to the brainstem? You can't look at the picture, I'm cheating.
It wouldn't help me either.
Okay, I'll show you. Well, if you can see.
Good
You
question.
see, again, I'll have to get the name. It's called the cerebellum peduncles. And
I see that.
you see you've got the this area here is the space where the cerebellum joins to the fourth ventricle, so the fluid from the cerebellum can come into the fourth ventricle and then be recharged from the choroid plexus there, and then feed the nerves on the other side. Above that, again, you've got nerve tracts. Now, some of them may not be myelinated, but my impression is that's just myelinated axons travelling down, taking the information from the cerebellum into the brainstem. So you start getting a picture, and what happens is, in nerve tracts and in nerves, you kind of get this kind of picture, where it's like a train of everything going in the same directions, and the axons just get longer and longer, so there's fewer and fewer connections. It's not processing things, it's delivering the information, it's delivering whatever the communication is, whether it's electrical, whether it's energetic, it's kind of travelling through. Then within the brain itself, or within the cerebrum or within the cerebellum, the neurons are joining in all sorts of different ways. You've got one nucleus of a neuron there, and it's got connections from different neurons coming to it, so it's no longer just a train track, and they will connect. Several different neurons will connect to several other neurons, and they'll be connecting, and it becomes like a tree with billions or trillions and trillions of connections, and then they become more and more linear until they're like just tracks going in one direction. Okay. And I don't know the names. I think these are dendrites on the nucleus of the neuron, or the body of the neuron, had dendrites, which are like roots coming out from it. And then the arms and the little pads, which are called telodendria. These are like little communicators on the end of the arms of the other one. They will connect to the dendrites and also to the body of the nucleus. So they send the electrical charge or the information back and forth.
Do you say there's sort of one lot of dendrites connecting with the next
No,
lot?
no. The dendrites are on the body, and the telodendrites, or what they're called, are on the ends. Let me get my picture. So I cannot remember. Telodendria. Okay. These little arms here, coming off of here, these are telodendria. Then on the body of the nucleus, these are dendrites, the little trees, and the telodendria bring the information and it connects to the dendrite, so it joins one neuron to another. And what will happen is, within the body of the cerebrum and within the body of the cerebellum, it's like a flower coming out, so you get them joined together in tons and tons of different ways until they start gathering and become nerve tracks, and then they come down from the cerebrum into the brainstem, and from the cerebellum into the brainstem, and they're becoming much more linear. And then you get the nerves coming out of the brainstem, which are absolutely linear because they're just the axons, myelinated axons, which become the nerves, which travel down the body. And that can go all the way out through a nerve and connect to a cell at the end of a finger. And at the end of that, it will have the telodendria joining to a muscle to communicate that bit of information that will travel through an unbroken line of neurons joining to neurons. And it starts off very flower-like and becomes more and more linear till it becomes this one strand that delivers a bit of information to a cell, and it can communicate back the other way. So this gives a picture of how all the neurons join together, and it's interesting, the energy changes. The energy of the different areas of the cerebrum are different, the different areas of the cerebellum are different, and they join. But it's absolutely important, these areas of the cerebrum that come down and join to the brainstem, they connect it. There's an energy there, and as they connect them, then something moves. And where the cerebellum joins to the brainstem, it's important to know that connection. It's not just the neurons connecting, the cranial fluid is flowing through that, and then it's flowing down the nerve tracts, and then it's flowing down the nerves within the brainstem, and then it's flowing down the nerves as they come out of the brainstem, and then down the nerves as it's going out through the body. And there's a communication back and forth. Have I lost absolutely everyone now, or are we
No,
with you.
no, but what interesting.
Pardon?
I've got a sort of what I think is a silly question, really.
Well, you've always got...
Yeah, well, they're always silly. Anyway, like, you've got the message going down to the finger, to the muscle saying, bend.
Yeah.
Would it be a different nerve to would there be a different nerve to send the message down saying, straighten? That's just the thing.
It would be to a different muscle. because
Right.
muscles just contract, so there would be another muscle to contract to open it. But what you do get is communication going the other way, so you get communication coming from the brain and coming down and connecting that way, and you get messages from the muscle and sensory things from the body travelling the other way.
Yeah.
So there's, and these are coming from thoughts, from patterns, from from actions, from memories, from past lives, from heavenly communication, from outside. This is all delivered into cranial fluid, neurons, axons, myelinated glial cells, and microglial cells, and that's kind of it. And somehow those physical cells make a home for our intellect. And it's strange to look at it, to get a picture of what's there, because suddenly it changes your perception. I know for me, I thought, well, there's a place in there where I live, where I am. But actually when you look at it, it's just neurons and axons and these different cells, and there's no thing there. And scientifically, they're just producing electricity. And that's kind of it. But it houses spirit as well. But there's not like a little home spirit there or us there. And there is a difference between the different parts of the brain, the qualities of it.
They say the fourth ventricle is like connected to the spirit.
Pardon?
The fourth ventricle is the place that connects to spirit. I think they say that pleasure probably.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe some people say the thalamus is the place where the spirit is home, or the not the spirit, the soul's home or something like that is the thalamus. But people see it in that area. But when you look in that area, it is just those cells that I said, which are the same cells as the different parts of the brain. When my Kundalini awoke and the energy was just permanently travelling through my brain, and it doesn't just travel through, if it would be nice if it just travelled through the cranial fluid, because the cranial fluid doesn't seem to house the intellect, nor does the astrocytes. For me, my experience, the astrocytes don't house the intellect, but somehow the neurons house the intellect. Somehow this charge and movement of energies that moves through the neurons houses the intellect. And it's very hard to allow that to happen or be with that, because in a way, as it travels through those areas, you feel the quality of what you presume to be yourself, what you normally would be. You're watching that, and it's quite a very strange and hard to be with experience, or certainly for me it was. Other people may find it very easy, but I found it quite a traumatic experience, really. And to disassociate, in the cerebellum it was quite nice, as the energy, because it would work just slowly through different parts of my brain, whereas before that you get a rush. Now, as I mentioned to someone on the group, just because my Kundalini went off, it doesn't mean that your Kundalini went off. So if you don't want that to happen, it's fine, it doesn't have to happen. But for me, certainly looking at this anatomy can bring that alive in a slow way, but bring it alive nevertheless. But before that, the energies would rise fast, and there'd be a bright light, go off. The difference was after that light didn't go off. The energy was just continually going through, but rather than a rush, it's just really slow, moving from part to brain to part. If I'd just be lying in bed all night, not sleeping, watching this energy travelling up my spine and then through my brain, as it comes up to my brain, I'm thinking, it's going to kill me. If that gets to my brain, it's going to kill me. But when it got to brain, it's not, but you're just watching what you perceive to be yourself. So it does kill something. It does kill who you think you are, because you are not that anymore when it goes through. And it was always most difficult as it moved through the cerebrum, the top of the brain, especially when it gets to the front, because I perceived that as much more to do with the intellect, the front of the cerebrum. And the other place was from there, it would, I'm not sure, I think it would start in the cerebrum and come forwards, and it was always quite iffy there, and also the connection here. And then as it dropped through the thalamus into the brain stem, because energetically it would come into the thalamus, and the thalamus it is a bit like, as you're saying, where you house your being, and just we are very kind of connected to that, but to view it's a bit scary. So, but the cerebellum doesn't have that intellectual quality to it. It's much more like the dream state. And I was always been, oh, thank God for that. It's gone into this dream state quality of the cerebellum. So by now, I don't think anybody's going to have that type of experience. It just happened to me, and in a way, that's how I can produce the anatomy in this work, because I can just see it in myself. But all that is there is cells, and it is nerve tracts that just become more and more focused, that become more and more a nerve tract, and they spread out. And it's interesting, you get something goes on here, and it produces whatever, and it comes down, and it's all, each one is connected to the other, and it becomes more and more straight line until it becomes this one little thing at the end that delivers a message. And that's quite physical as it comes into the body. And it was always interesting me in the other direction as it opens up. I always wondered if there were like neurons that weren't so much connected to other neurons, but just connected up to the higher energies. So you had the higher energies with some dendrites going, we're just going to connect to the higher energies and get input from that. But I think maybe that just travels through the cranial fluid. Anyway, I've talked about something I really wasn't sure how to talk about. Too confusing. We'll have a break for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll do a meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just going to look at one last bit of anatomy before we do the meditation. So you've got the dural sheath, you've got the spinal cord inside, and then you've got the subarachnoid space between that with the cranial fluid running around the spinal cord. And then the nerve sheath, as it comes out, that's made out of the dural membrane as well and surrounds the nerves. And until it gets down to the spinal ganglion, where the two, they come out in pairs. Can you see they're coming out in pairs and then they join together here?
Mm.
Until they join, each one within the sheath is still bathed in cranial fluid. So it's not just around the spinal cord there, the cranial fluid. You can see here it's a bit like a funnel. It bathes the nerves as they come out until they join. So you've got a reservoir of cranial fluid, but also it's travelling out for quite a way until it's coming out the side of the spine and is bathing those. Can people see that? Okay, yeah. And this can go for quite a way. And this is a bit similar where the cranial nerves are coming out of the brainstem. They can travel for quite a way in the cranial fluid before they enter the body. And it's the same with the spinal nerves. They come out as a pair, then they come out and they're still bathed in cranial fluid until they join and it just becomes a nerve. But what happens also, it's not just coming out sideways, it's travelling downwards, because as we grow the spine lengthens but the spinal cord stays a similar length or doesn't grow a lot, it doesn't grow as fast, so you get the horse's tail here. But a nerve coming out of the top of the spine, yes, it will come out horizontally, but the more it goes down, it drops down each time. And you can see here, you've got into the thoracic area, it's going down about 1.5 vertebrae, and as you get towards the lower spine or the lumbar spine, it's going down 2 or 3 vertebrae before it comes out. So, and it's bathed in cranial fluid that whole length within its sheath. And you can see that there, that it's coming out, dropping down and coming out the side of the spine. And so it's got this like funnel of cranial fluid where the cranial fluid gathers into it and just sits there and can slowly feed into that nerve as fluid, as oxygen, as glucose, and moving out through the nerve. So it isn't just a straight connection. And because you've got the gravitational pull, these act like little funnels for the cranial fluid to slowly move into the nerves as they travel out. And through that whole length of nerve. And again, in the spinal cord, it will be nerve tracts, and then these gather together and become the nerves travelling out, and then they become nerves in the cranial fluid, and then they become nerves in the body. And in that whole area, when it's travelling out, the spaces between are full of cranial fluid. So it's got the cranial fluid within the myelinated glial cells, they're surrounded by cranial fluid. So it has a different quality when it comes out into the body, where this fluid around it is a milky type quality fluid. So again, there's different qualities to the nerves as they travel out through the body. Okay, so let's do a meditation. Sorry to give you so much anatomy. Had to be done. But we can use this now, because now we have a way, not just viewing the cranial fluid, we have a way of viewing the nerves. We have a way of viewing the brain. We have a way of seeing the cranial fluid moving through the brain, and also the neurons making tracks through the brain in the communication. Okay, let's just, now we've kind of got a picture, let's just meditate with it. So, closing your eyes and dropping into the holographic breathing. Saying hello to the earth, sending a smile to the earth, sending some energy to the earth, and allow the earth to say hello back. Allow yourself to receive from the earth. Notice what that feels like through your body and through your energies. And saying hello to the higher self. Send a smile, send some energies to the higher self. And allow the higher self to say hello back. Allow yourself to receive from the higher self. Notice what that feels like through your body and through your energies. And asking the earth and the higher self to be with you as a resource, as a source of wisdom for yourself, as your connection to the whole. And asking them to be with you through the whole session. Being aware of the heart, remembering the holographic breathing, still very gently be doing holographic breathing, and the blood flow coming to the brain, to the cerebrum, to the cerebellum, to the brain stem, to the spinal cord. And here it's being filtered out and becoming cranial fluid. Notice the change of quality as it becomes cranial fluid. Cranial fluid is 99% water, and then the extra 1% is glucose, oxygen, salt, some neurotransmitters. It's 99% water, and notice the quality of that water, and that it channels light, produced in the choroid plexus, in the ventricles. It's produced through the whole central nervous system. Feeling the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, the cranial fluid there. And this is going to make its way to the nerves in one way or another. And one way that it makes its way to the nerves is that it releases, when it releases in all directions, it releases out around the whole cerebrum, but it also releases inwardly into the lateral ventricles. It releases down into the third ventricle, and the lateral ventricles feed into the third ventricle. In the third ventricle, one way that it can release out of the third ventricle is into the optic nerve. Right at the front of the third ventricle there's a beak which wraps around the optic nerve, so it can go in there. At the back of the third ventricle, as it goes into the fourth ventricle, there's the nerve nucleus there. It can feed into that. And from the lateral ventricles it can feed into the optic nerve, and this travels down through the optic nerve. And then at a certain stage the optic nerve travels out to the eyes. Cranial fluid flowing down the optic nerve. It's carrying the information from the light, all the informations from the brain, the qualities of the energies from the third ventricle, which is where the Ajna chakra is, feeds into the eyes. And then as the cranial fluid drops down into the fourth ventricle, you get all the cranial nerves coming out, feeding the face, and from the fourth ventricle they come into the nerves that are travelling out through the brain stem, cranial fluid travelling through them. And then as it comes out through the brain stem, got cranial fluid around it, feeding it, and then travelling into the face, into the nerves, into the tongue, into the ears, into the nose, into the vagus nerve, travelling down through the whole digestion. The cranial fluid can travel off. Then from the fourth ventricle continues down the centre of the spine in there. It's called the central canal, but for me it's the fifth ventricle. Travels down full of oxygen, full of glucose, and it spreads out into the nerve tracts that form the nerves coming out of the spinal cord, being bathed in cranial fluid as they come out. And they travel out through the whole body with cranial fluid travelling down the nerve capillaries through the myelinated glial cells. So you get this unbroken layer, communication of cranial fluid travelling down the nerves. Also the cranial fluid will just expand out from the cerebrum, from the cerebellum, around the brain, around the cerebrum, and it will drop down around the cerebellum. And it will spread out from it will drop down around the brain stem, and it will spread out from the cerebellum also around the brain stem, and this can be picked up by the cranial nerves feeding the face, the vagus nerve feeding the body, all of the cranial fluid from within the ventricles, the fourth ventricle. This can come out through the sides, foraminae of the fourth ventricle, and this also feeds these nerves. And it travels down around the whole spine, so you get the cranial fluid around the whole spine, spinal cord, and travelling down through the nerves as a communication, as a food, as an environment, everything. the cerebrum opens up like a flower on both sides. It's full of cranial fluid. It's 90% water, and the cranial fluid in it is 99% water. And all of these connections become linear until they become nerve tracks coming down from the cerebrum into the top part of the brainstem, just below the thalamus. All the nerve tracks coming down there. And these become not just tracks for the neurons and axons, these become tracks for the cranial fluid to flow down. So the cranial fluid can flow between all of the cells within the cerebrum and then down through these large nerve tracks. I think they're called the cerebral peduncles, into the brainstem. So they flow through the body of the cerebrum down into the brainstem. And the cerebellum, 2 lobes of the cerebellum, full of cranial fluid. And then all of these patterns of the neurons become more and more linear until they join to the back, till they become tracks of axons, myelinated axons joining into the back of the brainstem. So it's a connection for all of those neurons to connect into the brainstem, but also this is like an avenue for the cranial fluid to travel down, travelling through the body of the cerebrum, travelling through the body of the cerebellum into the brainstem, also down through the body of the brainstem. And this can also travel into the nerves and out into the face, and down through the vagus nerve into the body. And it can also travel down into the spinal cord and out through the nerves. So you have the cranial fluid moving in all sorts of different ways. It's basically coming out. There's a large proportion of it that has to travel out down through the nerves, so it goes in all of these different directions and ends up travelling down the nerves. And the myelinated glial cells become capillaries to take this communication out through the whole body. Light and communication can travel down through this, through the whole spine, out into the body. So there's the quality of the cranial fluid. There's also the quality of the neurons. Become also unbroken tracks from anywhere in the brain. They're all communicating with each other from in the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem. They're all connecting. They're becoming tracks. They travel off down through the nerves unbroken until they connect to a cell, a muscle in the body. So there's the fluid. There's also the neurons. A very different quality to the neurons. And the whole, all the different areas of the brain are made these neurons. And then you've got large area of myelinated axons joining the two halves of the brain. It's like a really thick nerve. The axons joining the two sides of this flower. The communication to travel back and forth, and they're bathed in cranial fluid. And this joins between the two lateral ventricles. And then also within all of this you have the astrocyte cells, which are like the connective tissue, but they also have this electricity, this communication travelling through them. And there's the myelinated glial cells, which also have these qualities. You feel energies and fluids and light travelling in any which way feels good through the brain, through the cerebrum, through the cerebellum, through the brainstem, through the spinal cord, out through the nerves. It's one organ. Lots of different names for the different bits, but it's one organ with the same cells completely joined together. Every neuron can connect with every neuron. Every bit of cranial fluid can connect to every bit of cranial fluid. The energies of every astrocyte cell can connect to every astrocyte cell. It's one organ with different shapes and different qualities. Connecting out through the body, the energies may change as it connects out through the whole body, more connecting to the earth and the earth within us. And this can travel back up through the nerves as communication back through the cranial fluid, through the neurons. As it gets into the central nervous system, also through the astrocyte cells. One body that connects to consciousness. One body that holds the intellect. One body where we often sense ourselves as being or viewing from. And it's just cells and water. And it somehow thinks, it somehow holds the intellect, it somehow connects us to the higher energies in the universe. And breathe with the holographic breathing. It spreads out through the body and connects to the earth. And the earth spreads back through it and connects to the heavens, gently breathing with the holographic breathing. All connecting, all healing. Relax your necks. Let it go through your necks. No one knows how it works. It houses us. Well, maybe someone knows how it works, I don't know. And breathing very gently. And sending a thank you to the earth. Sending a thank you to the higher self. Sending a thank you to yourself for participating. and taking in all that anatomy and letting the energies go off. You build up an energy tonight and through this meditation, letting the energies go off for love and healing to the earth, for love and healing to the higher self, letting it go off for love and healing to all sentient beings and creation, and letting it come to yourself for love and healing. You're also a sentient being. And when you feel ready, gently allowing yourself to come back. So in holographic breathing, there's a gentle motion of the jaw. Jaw opens on the in-breath, closes on the out-breath, and it's a small motion. And people find their own amount, and it varies over a period of time. But it's not big, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters, quarter of an inch, sometimes less. And on the same time as you're doing that, the lips are closed all of the time, and upper surface of the tongue is on the roof of the mouth, and as much as feels comfortable. And quite often when people are learning, and a bit later, people are used to opening the jaw and the lips open at the same time. So the lips open, or they open the jaw and the tongue comes off the roof of the mouth. But there's an innate ability, probably from suckling, that the lips can stay sealed, not tense, in a relaxed way, that they can stay closed in a relaxed way and the jaw can move, and the tongue can have a relaxed and soft seal to the roof of the mouth as the jaw moves. I'll just demonstrate so people can see that it really is a very subtle movement of the jaw. So I'll just do just for a few moments. So and very quickly you drop into an alternative state, kind of a shamanistic, very relaxed place. So we're going to go through some exercises, but this time with our eyes open. First of all, to get that seal on the lips, notice you can kind of purse your lips. You can, it goes in here, and the lips stay closed. Try that a few times. You can drop the jaw and the lips stay closed. And now also put the tongue on the roof of the mouth and pull the jaw down. And notice it's like you get a suction with the tongue as the jaw drops down. So you can make a seal, and that is very similar to what babies do. Their lips seal around the nipple in a relaxed way, and the tongue seals the nipple to the roof of the mouth. So we can make a seal, a natural ability to making a seal. But now doing that in a very relaxed way with a much smaller motion of the jaw. So the lips are relaxed with a light seal, the flat of the tongue on the roof of the mouth with a very relaxed seal, and now just in a small way, or however big, opening the jaw. The lips stay sealed, the tongue stays on the roof of the mouth. The jaw closes, the lips stay sealed, the tongue stays on the roof of the mouth. Now make that movement a bit smaller. And now it's a bit like a pump. Notice as you're opening the jaw, it's natural to breathe in through your nose. As your jaw drops down, it's like a little pump. It brings the air in through the nose. Then as the jaw rises, it's like a pump. The breath comes out through the nose. So just being with that, and make the movement smaller. The jaw opens, you breathe in through the nose. The jaw closes, you breathe out through the nose. The tongue stays on the roof of the mouth. The lips stay closed with a very light seal. And now turning that round, so rather than the focus being on the jaw, you change the emphasis. Be aware of the breath coming in through your nose, and as the breath comes in, the jaw gently opens. Then as the breath comes out, the jaw gently closes. And notice how that takes the pressure away from the jaw. It becomes much more relaxed when you have the emphasis on the breath. So as you're breathing in, the jaw gently opening. The lips still have this very natural light seal. The tongue has a very natural light seal. Then as you breathe out, the jaw naturally closes. And notice there's a lot of people already closing their eyes and going into an altered state. Notice you start feeling very relaxed, and it's hard to keep your eyes open. You're drifting into a different state. As you breathe in, the jaw naturally opens with it. As you breathe out, the jaw naturally closes. And smaller, slower motion of the jaw, the lips stay relaxed and closed, the tongue stays on the roof of the mouth. Relax the back of the neck, relax the back of the head. Notice it gets harder and harder to actually do it and keep the eyes open, because you're drifting into a different state of consciousness. And it's good to relax the back of the neck and back of the head, because a lot of the energy is coming through there. Now letting the eyes close, and if you want, let the eyes close. Just naturally being with that. As you breathe in, the jaw is gently opening. As you breathe out, the jaw gently closing. Notice how natural that feels. You get these waves of energy, waves of relaxation moving through your body. Very soft, relaxed seal in the lips, very soft, relaxed seal in the tongue. It's the upper surface of the tongue on the roof of the mouth. The tip of the tongue is close to or touching the front teeth. Maybe half an inch or an inch of the tongue on the roof of the mouth. The more you do, the more of the tongue naturally starts covering the roof of the mouth. But start off with whatever feels most comfortable. Notice you go into this place that's halfway between being awake and being asleep. It's like the dream state. It's a very shamanistic space. It feels very natural. Relax the throat. As you breathe in, the chest is opening, the jaw is opening. As you breathe out, the chest is closing, the jaw is closing. As you breathe in, the abdomen is opening, the jaw is opening. As you breathe out, the abdomen is closing, the jaw is closing. You may be able to feel it right down into the pelvis. So breathing in, the pelvis is opening, the jaw opening. As you breathe out, the pelvis closing, the jaw closing. But also notice in a very subtle way, the whole face has started to breathe. This gentle motion of the jaw connects through every cell, through every part of us, And it especially connects up through the face, through the brain, through the cranium, through the neck, through the throat, connects it to the rest of the body. And this whole area that wasn't really breathing so much before, in a very subtle way, starts to open and close with the breath. And it's not a physical thing you're aiming for, it's very subtle. The more subtle you do it, the stronger, more profound the experiences. And as the jaw closes, it's okay for the teeth to touch, but they just float together. There's no pressure. They're not resting and pressing together. They may just bounce around, gently touching a tiny bit. Or the jaw can just be slightly separate as you breathe out. Breathing in, the jaw gently opens with the breath. Breathing out, the jaw relaxes closed. It relaxes open and it relaxes closed. And you drop into a deep, shamanistic, alternative space, a channel. But it's your own channel, it's you, your energies, connecting with the earth, connecting with the higher self, which are reflections of you, very resourceful, very nutritious on all levels. Okay, and gently allowing yourself to come back.